We're going to do an introduction to AA and step 1 today. Okay?
Okay. We'll have to clarify some things.
Okay.
Okay.
Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we have Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone?
First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever one you may choose, and thank you for watching on YouTube. YouTube is something that we are finding, I would say, some enjoyment out of, Ben.
I've been having fun with it. We've been getting some cool emails. I've gotten to talk to some people on the phone.
Yeah, it's working. So, listen, if you see something, if you watch something that you think somebody could benefit from, feel free to share it with them. And in the end, if you would like to reach out to us, you could always reach us. Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And we are going to ask you for your phone numero. Phone numero, Ben.
That was some terrible Spanish.
In today's episode, listen, what we wanted to do, and this is something that we've talked about in the past, and we just haven't done it. You oftentimes hear Ben and I talk about Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is by way of decision. This is the program that we choose to use to stay sober on a daily basis. And realized we haven't really gone into much detail about what it is, and I guess we just somewhat assume that people know what it is, but people might not know what it is. So what we decided to do is we are going to kind of break this down into different episodes. In today's episode, you're going to be an introduction into AA, kind of where it formed, how it formed, the founders of it, so on and so forth, and an introduction into step 1 of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then we're going to do another episode on step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, all the way through the 12 steps. And by the time we get to the end, you will have a much better understanding of what AA is and what ultimately it is going to do for yourself or a loved one. So how'd I do there, Ben?
Pretty good. Let me just say a couple things. I think it's really important due to the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step programs in general. Tom and I do not represent AA as a whole. I think one thing to really consider when listening to this is based off of our personal experiences, our interpretation. So just want to throw that out there.
Yeah. And I think why that is because, and why Ben says that we don't represent AA as a whole. AA is across the world at this point, and it's something that is utilized in every country. Well, at least to my knowledge, I don't know. I know it's utilized across the world, across the globe, and so there's different interpretations of it. There's different, I suppose, ways that you can utilize AA. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but the reason we say we don't represent it as a whole is because a lot of it can be opinion based. Now, our approach with it is if it's in the book, then it is viable to the program of AA. And when we say if it's in the book, you may see right now Ben flipping through his miniature version of this. Alcoholics Anonymous has a book that comes with it, which is called The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And you may have seen it before. Ben, why don't you go ahead and close it and put it up to the camera there a little bit closer so the people can see. The people in the back, Ben, a little closer.
I got a little big book.
You have little arms. Give me that.
Hey, don't lose my page there, though.
All right. I lost your page.
Tom.
So that was it. I lost your page, though. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I know where it's at. You know if a man's life is together?
How?
His big book is falling apart.
Oh, that's good.
Look, this thing is taped together.
And
I want to answer your question because it's in the big book. And this is 2008. Over 113,000 groups with AA in more than 180 countries.
Okay, so 180 countries AA's in, and that's 15 years ago, 2008. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure it's by far. And listen, you're always going to hear people say, oh, AA is not for me. AA is a cult. AA is this. AA is that. And that's fine. But the fact of the matter is AA at this point has got millions of people sober. So let's get into a little bit of the history of it. And I'll just start and just a disclaimer, when it comes to AA stuff, Ben is your guy. Me, I know enough to get by, but Ben knows the nitty gritty about it, the details. So I'll just start with, my basic knowledge, and then Ben, you get into the details. So from my understanding, Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in 1935. Am I right there, Ben?
Yes.
By a guy named
Bill W.
Bill W., also known as Bill Wilson. And Bill Wilson lived in Akron, Ohio. Bill Wilson was an alcoholic. And Bill Wilson, along with a couple other of people, found that it was the way to get sober was to help another alcoholic. Right, Ben?
People that know this stuff, yes. People that know this stuff, the Big Book came out in 1939. The book came out after the group. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, the book came out in 1939, but the actual, I suppose the thought process, maybe the program in and of itself, 1935. Maybe when it started coming to fruition was 1935.
Bill W. got sober December 11th, 1934.
Okay.
I'd have to look it up. You can Google it, but there's a official date that they chose to be the birthday. But
it is vastly at this point, in this stage of the game, in 2023, it's the most utilized way of getting sober. And there's just no arguing that. So let's go ahead, Ben, get into a little bit of the history of it, and then we'll go from there.
So I think the easiest way to explain it is, were we going to talk about the first step today too?
Yes.
All right. So, and this is part of, the first step is covered in a number of chapters in the Big Book. But with that being said, in the doctor's opinion, it talks about Bill W. It doesn't say Bill W. specifically.
Let me pause you there. You're going to reference a lot of things in the Big Book. Before we get to that, talk about how the Big Book came about.
That's where I was going.
Oh, okay.
I got you.
Yeah,
I got you. So, guy Bill W. went to treatment 3 times. He met a doctor that worked at Charlie Towns Hospital, Dr. Silkworth. They refer to this guy as a saint of AA today. But basically speaking, the short elevator version story of it, just for the sake of the podcast, there's a lot of details, a lot of history, there's people that work in the archives of AA and Intergroup, it's crazy how much history is in AA. My knowledge on it is minuscule compared to what's out there. But with that being said, Bill W. goes to a treatment at Charlie Towns Hospital, first, third time. Dr. Silkworth comes along, and this guy, Dr. Silkworth, has this theory of an allergy idea. They wrote a chapter called The Doctor's Opinion. But Bill W. took that idea that Dr. Silkworth presented to him, that Bill was allergic to alcohol, which we'll get into a little bit more here down the road in the podcast. But he took that and his prior experience with back prior to Alcoholics Anonymous, there was a group called the Oxford Group. And the Oxford Group wasn't necessarily for alcoholics. It was for people that wanted to live their life better, so to speak. They didn't have 12 steps. They had the 5 tenets, which I got the book that doesn't have all the stories in it. Otherwise, I could point them out to you. I don't have them memorized. But it was for people that just wanted to better their life, so to speak. Maybe they had an affair. Maybe I don't know, their life just wasn't aligning with spiritual principles, so to speak. And it was a religious-based program, the Oxford Group. But what ended up happening with the Oxford Group is it ended up attracting some drunks. And they formed what's called the Drunk Squad of the Oxford Group. And basically speaking, this guy, Ebby Thatcher, shows up to see Bill W. at his house, and Ebby Thatcher was a terrible drunk, a really good friend of Bill W., shows up to the house, and he's sober. And Bill W. is like, what is going on here? How is this guy sober? He's a worse drunk than I am. And Ebby Thatcher basically had gone through the Oxford Group the 6 tenets. And did I say 5 earlier? I meant to say 6.
Yeah, you said 5.
Yeah, 6 tenets, and basically it's in a sense the 12 steps. Bill took those six tenets and turned them into 12 steps, so to speak. But Bill W. ends up taking what Dr. Silkworth taught him about the theory of an allergy. And Dr. Silkworth also, while Bill W. was in the hospital for his 3rd treatment, he came up with this idea that he needed to carry this message to other alcoholics. And the elevator version is he went around the hospital telling his story to other alcoholics, and he felt lifted up by it. So I'm kind of paraphrasing, but lifted up and was like, oh man, there's something to this. He felt something like a purpose, if you will, is what I'm assuming, and ends up leaving Charlietown's hospital. He ends up going to Akron, Ohio to do a business deal, and the business deal is on the verge of falling apart. And Bill is in a hotel by himself, and he feels like having a drink. And so he makes some phone calls. He goes to the front desk, the receptionist, and asks if they know any drunks in the area, etc. He gets this list. I believe, don't quote me on this, he was given 12 phone numbers, ironically. And it wasn't until the last phone call that he was put in touch with Dr. Bob's wife. And Bill W., after making all these calls, being in Akron, Ohio, where he knows nobody that's sober, ends up going and visiting this guy, Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob is a terrible drunk. He becomes the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the two of them, set out to, a lot of times they go to hospitals they talked about and find alcoholics to tell their story to tell them they found a solution. At the time, they were using the 6 tenets of the Oxford group, and it just kind of turned into a movement, so to speak, is the best way for me to paraphrase it. And I reiterate, there is so much history on this stuff, and so many details I'm leaving out, and maybe even getting a little wrong, to be honest with you, but this is the general gist of it. But they end up forming this movement, and over the course of time, the first 100 members of Alcoholics Anonymous got sober based off of this quote-unquote step work that didn't exist yet, and they said, let's go ahead and write a book on how we did this.
So, if I understood you correctly, and I'll be honest, a lot of this is going to be education for me because I'm not as involved in this as Ben is. Dr. Silkworth was the first doctor you referred to. That's different than Dr. Bob.
Yes.
Dr. Silkworth in the beginning was the guy that had a theory of alcoholism being an allergy. Correct.
Correct.
Then you had, who's the guy that had the 6 tenets?
Ebby Thatcher had worked the 6 tenets.
So in the beginning, you had Dr. Silkworth, Ebby Thatcher, Bill Wilson, and Dr. Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And those were kind of like the 4 amigos, if you will, that kind of were the, call it, founding fathers of AA.
There's a couple more, but for the sake of the podcast, I won't nerd out too much on the AA, but there's Dr. Young, or Jung, as some would call him.
Oh, Carl Jung?
Yeah.
Jung? Yeah. Okay, so...
Roland Hazard, another guy.
Yeah, all right. Well, anyway.
I digress.
So Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob were both drunks. Ebby Thatcher and Dr. Silkworth, they weren't drunks.
Ebby Thatcher was a drunk.
Ebby Thatcher was a drunk. Okay, so Dr. Silkworth had the theory of, okay, alcoholism is a disease, or you have an allergy of some sort.
An illness.
And Ebby Thatcher was a drunk, Bill Wilson was a drunk, Dr. Bob was a drunk. The 3 of them had kind of followed the 6 tenets, which was a part of the Oxford group, and they had found their way to sobriety through the 6 tenets, and they had found that the more that they share this with other people, it helped them stay sober. Once they realized this, they then decided, okay, there's something to this. We're able to help people get sober through what we are doing. Let's go ahead and create a book about it and maybe break these 6 tenets down into 12 steps. And here we are.
I want to talk about real quick what because I think this is so important. There's a saying, the best kept secret in AA is a 12-step. And it's referred to as an altruistic program. Altruistic means doing for others without expecting anything in return. And there's a quick, short story I want to tell real quick, because I think it's so important that Bill and Dr. Bob found purpose in carrying the message. And this is before, I reiterate, the AA book existed, the 12 steps existed, but they, like I said earlier, they were going to hospitals to tell their story, and they heard of a drunk that was at a certain hospital, and they got the opportunity to meet the wife in the lobby, and they talked to the wife prior to going upstairs to talk to the drunk husband, and the wife basically said, yeah, guys, I don't know, man. My husband has been to treatment and committed for alcoholic insanity, and he's hopeless and helpless, and I don't think you guys can cure him. And Dr. Bob and Bill basically said, well, we're not here to cure him. He's going to cure us. That makes sense? You following that?
Well, yeah, it's you help another. It's the 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous. I do think it's worth saying, too, because you referred to a couple of these people being in treatment. Treatment then didn't look like what treatment looks like today.
No.
Treatment back then was, these people drank themselves into oftentimes alcohol-induced psychosis, severe delirium tremors, because there wasn't a lot of medical interventions at that point. So treatment back then just really looked like you got admitted into the hospital. Maybe they gave you some comfort meds, and that was really it. Do you know anything more on that end?
They saw it back then more as a moral problem rather than an illness. And today, what Dr. Silkworth did was basically threw out the theory that there was more to alcoholism, the physical factor, which we can get into, but there's more to it than just, this person has been taken over by the devil and they choose to drink and they're just bad people morally.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, like even when Ben and I field calls with parents and loved ones, and in today, 2023, it's morphed into, not only alcoholism. I mean, a lot of drug addicts are using Alcoholics Anonymous to get clean and sober because addiction is addiction is addiction. We have learned over the years that it's so much more than that. It's not just, if everybody could just put the plug in the jug, then Alcoholics Anonymous, point blank period, would have never even been born, and people would just stop. There's multiple components to alcoholism. You have the spiritual component, you have the emotional, mental component, you have the physical component, and they all kind of blend together. And, an alcoholic is screwed up in every single one of those areas. And so I don't think they knew that then. Yeah. They just, back then it was, like, hey, stop drinking. Can't you see what this is doing to your friends, what this is doing to your family, the chaos that you're ensuing with the people around you. And we know today that it doesn't work that way.
It's interesting. We start having these conversations. We had our intention of talking about the history of AA, but just randomly these sidebars come up that I think are really important to address. Tom mentioned that their addiction is addiction is addiction. My drug of choice is heroin. I did crack, coke, meth, all that other stuff too. However, at the end, drugs was more my story than alcohol. I'm definitely an alcoholic, but I just want to throw it out there. For me, I found my solution in Alcoholics Anonymous, even though heroin is my drug of choice, without a doubt. And the reason that I bring that up, and this is tough, and I want to reiterate, this is why I say we don't represent Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. You remember when you say you are, and basically all I have is my experience. There are people in AA, and I understand where they're coming from. They want to stick to the singleness of purpose, which is a desire to stop drinking, where, they ask you not to bring up drugs in meetings, stuff along those lines. Hence, Narcotics Anonymous came along. The meetings that I go to in South Florida, and it's pretty much all the meetings down here, in South Florida, because it's such a recovery capital, like nobody has an issue with you talking about drugs in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And if they do, they're definitely the minority. The fact of the matter is very, very rarely do you come across somebody who's strictly alcohol these days. And, AA, at least from what I've seen down here in South Florida, has changed with the times. But I just want to throw it out there, like you can go to your respective anonymous program if narcotics. They even have Marijuana Anonymous,
Codependency Anonymous,
Meth Anonymous,
Cocaine Anonymous,
exactly. So
Sex Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous. And that's the thing, all these different 12-step programs. And again, another rebuttal to people that say, oh, the 12 steps isn't for me or it doesn't work. If it didn't work, then why would there be so many different offshoots of it? Because all they're doing is they're taking the basic principles that were brought forth in Alcoholics Anonymous and catering it and tailoring it to their respective addiction, and so it does work. It works for millions of people, and the proof is in the pudding. That's just it. And, Ben and I always, because here at Rock, we have people here that are in recovery that are active members of Narcotics Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And we always throw stones at each other. Oh, what program is better, so on and so forth. It's all in good fun. And, we're not, bottom line is they all work if you are willing to do the work. I don't think that there's one is better than the other, so on and so forth. So if you ever hear us talking about, what's that thing that you say? I like my recovery like I love my drugs, not stomped on.
Yeah, I like it like I like my 12 steps like I like my cocaine, not stepped on.
Yeah, and that's Ben's playful way of saying I go straight to the source, which is Alcoholics Anonymous, where it was born.
The original 12 steps. Yeah, but again, all in good fun. It's just teasing.
All right, so let's get into step one.
Yeah, we're going there.
Yeah,
Perfect.
We're going there. Yeah, let's just get into step one. Oftentimes all the time when somebody is first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll just base my own personal experience. I walk into a meeting. So Alcoholics Anonymous, the nuts and bolts of it take place inside of what's called an AA meeting. And so you go in to this room. Oftentimes they're at a church or they're at some sort of banquet hall. Alcoholics Anonymous they're self-supporting through their own contributions. So Ben and I could go to the local church and say, hey, we want to rent out the room every Tuesday night for an hour or 2 hours to host an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. The church says, okay, it'll cost you $100 a week. And amongst the members of that group, the people that go to that meeting on Tuesday night that Ben and I are renting out, we pass a basket around. They throw $1 in or $2 in or whatever. And then we then take that money, give it to whichever venue it is that's allowing us to utilize that room. It pays the rent. It allows us to buy literature like big books, like the 12 and 12s, the different literatures that's available inside of AA, and, the coffee and stuff like that. So self-supporting through its own contributions. You walk into this meeting and there's a bunch of people there.
And we're fortunate here down in South Florida to have clubhouses, not just churches. There's literally clubhouses down here all over the place that host meetings from first thing in the morning till midnight.
Yeah, it's literally just it's a building that's all it is. It's an AA clubhouse.
There's a meeting every hour on the hour almost.
Yeah. So when you walk into these meetings, oftentimes you'll hear people there's readings at the beginning of the meetings to how it works, and a bunch of different the preamble, so I'll admit it's a little overwhelming for somebody the first time they walk in there. But eventually you start to understand, more. And that's why I'm such a firm believer in building community, because once you meet some people inside these meetings, like I remember the first meeting I went to, I looked at a guy beside me. I'm like, what is all this? Like, what are they saying? The preamble, how it works. What are we even working here? And they will kind of walk you through, because there's people in those rooms that's been stepping foot into that same exact room for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. But eventually you get to what's called the 12 steps. And you get to the 12 steps by the way of getting a sponsor. So somebody that has worked the steps themselves, that's been a active member of Alcoholics Anonymous for a certain period of time. They've worked the steps themselves, and now it's their responsibility to take other people through the steps. And once you decide, okay, I'm getting a sponsor and I'm going to work the steps, you then go to step 1.
And I want to throw it out there too. Let me clarify this. The meetings are not Alcoholics Anonymous. I really like to emphasize the important part is the program. 3 things happen within going to an Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is why the book is so important. First, it teaches us about the problem. Then it tells us about the solution, and if we want anything to do with the solution, in Chapter 5, the actual program, which is the work, starts. It's kind of like if you have some fitness goals. First, you got to figure out you have a problem. Yeah, I'm overweight. My cardiovascular system's terrible. I can't hardly walk a block without losing my breath. Yeah, that's a problem. Okay, I have this. The solution, the suggested solution in this case would be like, oh, go get a gym membership, hire a trainer. Do I want to do that? Sure, I'll have something to do with the solution. The program is I show up, I got that gym membership, I got that trainer. That trainer is now going to give me a program to work towards my goals. Alcoholics Anonymous is laid out the same way. Problem, introduction to the solution. You decide whether or not you want anything to do with that solution. Then you start working a program. And I want to throw it out there too that, this is going to be a snapshot of what AA is. And based off of my experience, again, going back to the literature, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, everything changed for me in AA when I stopped just showing up to the meetings. That my sponsor taught me. The only thing that meeting makers make is meetings. Because I hear it all the time. Oh, I've been to those meetings. AA doesn't work. Do you ever work the steps? No. Well, it's like showing up to the gym and staring at all the equipment, never touching it, and expecting to get results. Like, you have to work the program. But my sponsor sat me down and read the big book to me line by line. Every time it said stop and do something, we stopped and we did it. Now, on this podcast, we're not going to sit here and read it to you line by line like it would. I'm going to give you some summaries. But Tom wanted to talk about step 1. And I think one of the most important things to bring up in step 1 is it's not our behavior that makes us alcoholics. Step 1 says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And I want to point out that what we cover in there's a chapter in the big book called The Doctor's Opinion. It's the first, generally speaking, it's the first thing that we read. If we don't read the preface and the forwards, I digress. But what the doctor's opinion, I'm going to summarize it as quickly as I can. It touches on the physical factor. It's not our behavior that makes us alcoholics and drug addicts. It's the way our body physically reacts to these drugs. And let me give you some really simple examples. Most people know what Adderall is, right, Tom?
Yep.
So Adderall is an amphetamine, one carbon molecule different than methamphetamine that comes over from the border of Mexico. But if you give somebody with ADHD Adderall, what happens to them, Tom?
It slows them down.
Slows them down and calms them down. What happens when you give it to somebody that doesn't have ADHD?
It speeds them up, Ben.
Yes, it does, Tom. Same drug, 2 different effects. One is an abnormal reaction. The person with ADHD has an allergy. The definition of an allergy is an abnormal reaction. A lot of people think hives, breaking out, throat swells up. So my sponsor told me I was allergic to alcohol and drugs. I'm like, well, I don't get hives. My throat's not swelling up. What I didn't realize was the definition of an allergy was abnormal reaction. And alcohol, for instance, it's a depressant. When you take a depressant, what's supposed to happen?
When you take a depressant,
Like alcohol.
what's supposed to happen?
Yeah.
I guess you get depressed.
Yeah, it slows you down, calms you, makes you relax, maybe sleepy. You give an alcoholic like me alcohol, which is in the family of depressants, it gives me a spike of energy like no other. That is not normal. You've seen the person at the bar, I'm sure, where you give them a glass of wine. They drank 3/4 of it. They don't, oh, I'm sleepy. Time to go home and go to sleep, right?
Yeah, I've met a few of those in my day.
What happens when you have a glass of wine, Tom?
I drank, well, one, I would never have a glass of wine. But if it was a beer, I would drink probably 12 or 15 or 20 more of them. And I'd be the life of the party.
Because you like the taste, right?
No. I like the effect.
I love it when people tell me, exactly. I love it when people tell me, I drank beer because I love the taste of it. I'm like,
that's
bull. I know. I love the taste of nice cold spring water, and I never sat down and drank a case of ice cold spring water at the bar, right? You know what I'm saying?
That's true. I like Kool-Aid, but give me one glass and I'm done.
So, point is alcohol, that example right there, same drug affects two people in two different ways. It gives me energy. It gives the normal person, it brings them down and calms them down. Marijuana. People know that you got the person that they smoke a joint, they sit down, they watch Scooby-Doo and order a pizza and pass out. Me, I smoke weed and I am bouncing off the walls, ready to run a marathon, go to the gym. I'm cleaning my car, cleaning the house. Same drug, two different effects. This has to do with the way that our body metabolizes alcohol and drugs. That's what differentiates alcoholics and drug addicts from normal people. The symptom from the allergy is the phenomenon of craving. You know, the hives and the throat swelling I was talking about earlier? That's not what happens. The symptom in this case is within the neurotransmitters of the brain, and basically, in layman's terms, tells me I need another one, like a robot. I'm not thinking about having another one. I'm just doing it. It's just go mode.
Very black and white.
Yeah, I don't know how else to explain it. But with that being said, there's the genetic component too. Native Americans and Asians cannot handle their alcohol.
I didn't know that.
Oh, dude. You ever go on a reservation? The level of alcoholism on a reservation is crazy.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have heard that.
So there's a genetic, and this is all tying back to Dr. Silkworth was the first person to come out and say there's some science behind this. This is more than a moral thinking problem. These people put this substance into their body, and their body metabolizes it different than normal people.
Interesting.
Opiates too, man. Opiates. Give me an Oxycontin. I am so talkative. It's crazy. I won't shut up.
Yeah.
You know?
All right, well, get us back on step one.
Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. That's what differentiates us from the normal people. It's not a thinking problem, so to speak. So if I had to sum up my alcoholism, my drug addiction, I have a mental obsession and a physical allergy. I have a mental obsession to have the first one, and a physical allergy. Once I start, I don't stop. The one that I can address is the mental obsession. I can't do anything about an allergy. If I'm allergic to shellfish, I just better avoid eating shellfish, right?
Correct, yeah.
So if I eat shellfish, I'm going to break out in hives, my throat's going to swell up. So the only part that I can do is adjust my thinking to not go eat shellfish. You following me?
Got it.
All right, very simple analogy. So let's talk about step one. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. The reason I just told that whole story about the science behind it and is because the powerless part is referring to the allergy. Once we put it in our body, we can't stop. Whatever drug, whatever alcohol that is, once you start, you can't stop. A lot of people look at the word powerless and think it means helpless, and that turns a lot of people off from 12-step programs. I'm not powerless. Weren't you taught, your dad raised you like, hey, man, we're men. We man our way through this.
Yeah, powerless is, and I could see that getting misconstrued. I would view powerless as being helpless, but that what you're saying is that's not the case here. You're powerless because you have a physical allergy, and you're powerless over the reaction that you're going to have once you take that first drink.
Correct. And then there's a dash in there. Remember Ron? Ron talks about the dash.
Episode 26, if you haven't heard Mr. Ron.
Was it 27?
26.
25?
28, maybe.
I think it's 25. It is 25. One of my favorite episodes, but Ron explains it very well. The dash means end of a thought, beginning of a new thought, that our lives have become unmanageable. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Dash, that our lives have become unmanageable. They're two separate things. A lot of people think a dash means and. It separates the two. And let me ask you this, Tom. From what I see, a lot of people try to manage their life with their drug of choice or alcohol. Like, for instance, if I'm somebody and I hate my job and it gives me anxiety and I'm afraid I'm going to get fired, that drink after work helps, right?
You look forward to it.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, let me get to that drink. The unmanageability of my life doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the fact that I have this allergy. And what the big book addresses, these 12 steps, is if I can live my life in a way where I'm able to reduce my anxiety, people being angry at me, my resentments, my fears, my depression, all the like, I'm less likely to pick up that first drink, right?
Yeah, because if you're able to limit all those things, your life won't be as unmanageable.
Correct. So,
got it.
Like, and that's why coming into treatment, we address all these underlying issues, trauma, all that stuff, because it's that stuff that gives us anxiety, gives us fear, that gives us, for lack of a better way to put it, an excuse to pick up a drink or a drug. So, the first step, they say it's the only step that you have to do perfectly. But a lot of people misunderstand it. I want to throw something out there that my sponsor said to me about the first step. I'm a guy that bounced in and out. I'm not like Tom. I didn't go to treatment one time and get this thing. My sponsor said to me, Ben, step 1 doesn't tell you can't drink. It tells you that you will. And when I looked back at my history, the evidence was stacked against me, right? Look at all the consequences I suffered. Getting a DUI, going to jail, losing custody of my kid, having to move to another state, ending up in psych wards, a couple overdoses, the list goes on. And I didn't stop. Step 1 doesn't tell me I can't drink. It tells me that I will. And what I mean by that is the fact that every time one of those consequences happened, I literally told myself, like, I'm not drinking or drugging again. This has to stop. And I found myself with this utter inability to stop. And I kept doing it and doing it and doing it, and the consequences got worse and worse and worse. Consequences did not keep a guy like me sober.
So when you say that your sponsor said step 1 is not telling you won't drink, it tells you that you will, it's kind of like a constant, step 1 is a constant reminder.
Yeah.
It's like the reminder on your or the wallpaper on your iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the reason that you need to get step 1 right, and as we will find out through the course of explaining these steps, the 12-step program has such little to do about drugs and alcohol, and has everything to do with managing life on life's terms. So if we're able to limit the amounts of all those things that you said, stress, emotional stress, all the above, all the things that we really would prefer not to have in our lives, if we can limit that stuff, then we will not have a reason to pick up drugs or alcohol, because drugs and alcohol is something that is utilized as a coping skill. And it is oftentimes referred to in the beginning as something that starts because of social norms or whatever. But lo and behold, for any drug addict and alcoholic, the longer that you use, it just develops into something that you do to deal with celebrations. You use alcohol to grieve. You use alcohol to get through a hard day. You use alcohol for anything. I always joked and said if the day ended in Y, it was a reason to drink,
So I want to do this real quick. There's one paragraph in the doctor's opinion that always really hits home for all my sponsees. And I reiterate, what we're talking about now is not a substitution for getting a sponsor and literally reading this book and have it broken down for you line by line. But my sponsor utilized a paragraph in the doctor's opinion, and he would have me do these little things like substitute my name. For instance, this sentence starts off, men and women drink. He had me put my name instead of men and women, so I'm going to read it as if it's, in the third person. Ben drinks essentially because he likes the effect produced by alcohol. He stopped me right there. And you said this earlier. The main reason that I drink and I do drugs is because I like it. I like the effect. You said that earlier about the spring water analogy I used. A lot of us, and it's funny, we were talking to a family about this the other day. Like, for instance, I've been through some trauma in my life. Don't get me wrong, trauma is absolutely fuel on the fire. We need to address this stuff. Tom and I were just talking about the underlying issues, learning how to live life so that we're less likely to pick up a drink. But the truth, and the hard-hitting truth, is the fact that I do it because I like it. And a lot of times when we ask our new clients, why'd you drink a drug? They're like, oh, I grew up in a bad neighborhood. My dad used to beat me. I was in a fiery car crash and watched the person next to me pass away, and it's ingrained in my mind. How often do alcoholics and drug addicts do something they don't like to do? Very rarely. It's hard for a drug addict and alcoholic to come out and say, at least it was for me, yeah, you're right, I did this stuff because I liked it. It's not the only reason, but the book refers to it as the essential reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing about 12 steps is it starts bringing out the truth. I have to start admitting this stuff to myself. I used to blame, I remember like blaming everybody else in the world around me. And my life is so bad, and you did this to me, and they did that to me, and that's why I am the way I am, and that's why I drink and drug. When I finally sat down and said, actually, I do this because I like it, I was like, dang. But it goes on to say, the sensation is so elusive that while Ben admits it's injurious, Ben cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. That's the Big Book's first definition of insanity. Not being able to differentiate the true from the false. Our clients come in here all the time. I did it. I'm sure you did it. With this story in our head of what it was like out there and what happened. And what our therapists do, what we help them do, is to see the truth, right? Would you agree?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they come in here playing the victim card, so to speak, and that victim mentality becomes real.
Well, they're used to that, yeah.
Yeah, and it worked for them out there for a long time. Playing the victim works for a long time until it doesn't. To Ben, his alcoholic life seems the only normal one. I thought everybody did heroin. That's just everybody I was hanging out with, though, right?
Same here.
You thought everybody lived the lifestyle you did.
Yeah, but I mean, they kind of really did. I grew up backwoods of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. There was some normal people.
Yeah. But Ben is restless, irritable, and discontented unless Ben can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which Ben sees others taking with impunity.
That right there is probably my alcoholism summed up in a couple of sentences because, and this is the case, not just unique to myself, but anybody I think that suffers from this. It wasn't out of the ordinary for me I was angry, I was discontent. I wasn't a happy person. I was not easy to get along with, so on and so forth. But when I started drinking, then I got to the bar, and got a few drinks in me, had half dozen beers, couple shots, play some darts with the boys. I become a completely different person. I was so I needed that. And we often refer to alcohol as a social lubricant, and it developed into even more of a social lubricant because when I didn't have it, that's all I wanted. And that's the only reason that I wanted it was because I wasn't okay with the person that I was when I didn't have it. And I think that's what that sentence says.
No, definitely. And one of the things, I think we've talked about this before, but you just mentioned how you're throwing darts, you have a couple drinks, you become a different person. I ask our clients all the time, what did your drug of choice do for you? And they're like, it did nothing. It gave me consequences. I ended up over. I'm like, no, what did it do for you that was good? And that's another part they have a hard time, for whatever reason, looking at. And that's what this process is about. Looking at the truth, looking at it from an entirely different angle. I ask them, what did it do for you? Let me tell you this. I've always had like a social anxiety when I was younger. And here I am, I'm a bartender. Go figure. So I go in all nervous as a bartender. I do an Oxycontin on my shift. Guess what? That nervousness, that anxiety goes away. All of a sudden, I'm the best bartender on the face of the planet. That's what it did for me. Took away my insecurity. Taking a drink, had a shot with the customers. Did that. I'll share a little something with you. When I worked for LA Fitness and I was on Roxy's, I started there sober, and I was a decent salesman. I ended up getting back on Roxy's. I sold more full pop memberships in South Florida. I like set the record at that time based off of what Roxy Codones were doing for me. Yeah. Like, because I would jump on the phone. I wouldn't take no for an answer. Like, I pestered people to death till they bought a gym membership because I had no fear and no anxiety until my tolerance built up. I could no longer afford those Roxy's, and then, of course, it all fell apart. But the truth and the fact is, it was a performance enhancer for me as far as sales went. And we can't deny that.
Yeah, a lot of times these substances, they are in the beginning. Even alcohol, like, it's nothing to go if you're in the sales world or if you're in any sort of business. You do deals over drinks, you make these deals, and it's a lot of times people, like in pharmaceutical sales, medical sales, stuff like that, they go and do a lot of these dinners and have martinis and so on and so forth. And it enhances, and we've talked about this with other people on the podcast, these drugs and alcohol create bonds between people.
Mm-hmm.
Really does. I mean, whether you're in college or you're a business professional or whatever the case is, granted, you're not going to go, shoot heroin with one of your prospective customers if you're selling windows. But hey, you might, a distributor or something of windows, and you invite the distributor out to dinner one night, and you guys have some drinks or a few beers, talk some sports and stuff like that. It creates bonds between people,
mm-hmm.
and it does advance people until it doesn't, and the thing is some people are able to do those things and be good with it. They don't have the allergy, though.
They can develop the allergy, though. I'm glad you brought that up. I talked about it being genetic. I'm one of those people, the first time that I had a drinking drug, I was hooked. There's no doubt, like the phenomenon of craving, which is a symptom, kicked in. But there's also, in the big book, it talks about that. The big book literally talks about every aspect, if you know somebody that knows this thing that can show you. You can drink your way, and this is scientifically proven too. I think the easiest example to use, for instance, is steroids. If you got a guy and you start giving them steroids, their body stops producing testosterone naturally. Their testes shrivel up and don't work anymore. Same thing happens with other drugs. Cocaine, meth, they deplete your body's ability to produce its own dopamine because you're putting in an artificial source, so to speak. Alcoholism, same thing. If you start off as a non-alcoholic without the allergy, if you drink enough for long enough because you enjoy it, say years and years go by, you can change your body chemistry. Alcohol works on the neurotransmitter GABA,
mm-hmm.
and it stops working efficiently. Your body won't produce. And the other part, I should have mentioned this earlier, going back to the science that proves all this stuff, it's been proven that when alcoholics drink alcohol, the acetaldehyde, which is a waste product after it digests and goes through the liver and everything, breaks down 70% slower in alcoholics than in normal people. But let's say, for instance, you drink long enough, 20 years, 6 beers a day, and you control it. You do that long enough, your liver's not going to function as well. You can drink yourself into a bodily change.
Yeah. And we see that happen a lot with people.
Yeah, we see people that come in here, they drink normally till they were 40 years old, and all of a sudden, boom, they're in treatment at 50.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a good breakdown of the first step.
Yeah, there's so much that we didn't touch on, but I don't want to get too crazy. Like, again, I reiterate, I said it once, I'll say it again. You know, we don't represent AA as a whole. In my opinion, this is not a substitution for sitting down and having the big book read to you by somebody that knows this thing front to back.
Nope.
I mean, the big book will also give, because what Bill W. does is he'll tell you something and then gives you examples. You know, any good author will use analogies. They'll find something that you know something about and then make a comparison to alcoholism. That's what Bill W. does through the whole thing. But he'll tell us something, and then there's stories in there that are part of the chapters that we read more about alcoholism, and there's a solution. It talks about the low bottom drunk, the high bottom drunk, the guy that lost it all, the guy that stayed bone dry for 25 years, didn't take a single drink, and then was a successful businessman. He focused on money, picked up a drink after 25 years of not drinking, was in the hospital and dead within 4 years because his allergy did not go away. Like, it hits home the point. There's just so much there. But yeah, that's a basic rundown of the first step. It's, I think, one of the most important key parts to put in there is like the powerlessness part. It doesn't mean you're weak and helpless. It's and so many people see that, and that's what turns people away from the program. They think that they know something. But when you go, the 12 steps is simply, when it's on the wall in the rooms, it's simply a snapshot. It's like reading the table of contents of a book and thinking that you read the book.
Right. Yeah, you're missing the content inside of it.
And the context.
Yeah. So, cool, Ben. Thanks, dude. That was awesome. So we hope that helped you at least give a brief introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous and what it's about. And yeah, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you would like some more info on it, you could always reach us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And like I said, we're going to do one of these for each one of the steps. And so you'll have a basic idea of what each step is. And but again, like what Ben said, this is not a substitute for going to meetings, getting a sponsor, working steps yourself, getting involved. And if you utilize us for that, we will be very, very upset. Right, Ben?
Yes.
Yes. So don't upset us. Go get a sponsor, do the deal. You could do it on your own. All right. Is that it, Ben?
Yeah, that's it.
All right. That is it. We will see y'all later.